at Russell Reynolds Associate, which is one of the big 5 executive recruiting firms. And then like many services industries, there's like a big 3, a big 4, a big 5, and then a million boutiques. So we've done it at the Russell Reynolds level, and we've also done it at the boutique level. And now we run our own firm, Artico Search. But back at Russell Reynolds, I was in the technology group when I first joined in 2011, and a CISO search came through. That year we did, and I was fortunate enough to raise my hand and say, hey, I'm the new guy, I'll do it. Back then they were like, no one really does this here. To put it in perspective, in 2011, Russell Reynolds Associates did 4,000 executive searches that year. 3 of them out of 4,000 were cybersecurity. Okay, so it was a thing, clearly, cybersecurity, well before 2011. However, we saw the massive explosion of cybersecurity after the Target retail breach in December of 2013. So my first year, we did like 3. The next year, we did like 5. And then it took off from there. I was there 6 years with Steve, started and built the cybersecurity practice at Russell Reynolds. But when we came back to start 2014, after the Target breach, all hell broke loose. I mean, our phones were ringing off the hook. Everybody from the CEO of Russell Reynolds was like, oh my God, it's the moment of cybersecurity. We have to capture it. And we just started doing tons of search work. So, 14, 15, 16 in particular, were straight up. Again, our first year, we did 3. Our last year, we did 53 in 1 year. So we did everything from Home Depot, Verizon, Equifax, Marriott, you name it. We did a lot of the Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000 work. And so it was really interesting for us to watch the journey, particularly of corporations. Most of them went from nothing, literally, or it was part of IT under infrastructure. It was like half of a person's job, to, hey, we need a dedicated information security group. We need a thing called a CISO or whatever it was, and all these other application security, product security, and so forth. So we just watched an explosion of awareness, an explosion of investment. We watched all these new VCs get created. Obviously, when you have a moment like that, which is so wonderful, you get thousands of new vendors that get created to help pull on the rope and solve the problem. So we've had a front row seat to it now for the better part of 15 years. That's been really helpful to understand where we came from and then where we are today. And Steve, I'm not sure if you have other things to add there.
Yeah. So where does that leave us now? Matt had mentioned the 𝗖ance relationship. So going back 2013, 2014, Matt and I would get invited to go to different CISO summits, and we were just at that point saying yes to everything and trying to figure out what company aligned with us in terms of mission and values, and who did we think that we could hitch our wagon to for the longer term. And so we got to know Phil Gardner and the 𝗖ance team, and I see some 𝗖ance clients on the line here, and they host a variety of really great programming. They started really as an events company doing CISO roundtables that Matt and I would fly around the country to speak at. And over the course of time, we realized that as they increased their SaaS-enabled subscription model, and they are really a data research company, that there would be great collaboration between Artico and our group and what they were doing from a research perspective. And so over the last 6 or 7 years or something like that, we've been working on CISO comp and budget data, going to practitioners like you all and saying, will you give us your data in an anonymous setting so that we can compile it all and come up with some really great analytics? And last year we had 1,400 participants, including 800 CISOs. And so with that data, we're able to drive some really fantastic data reports around a variety of different topics: compensation, budgetary trends, board reporting, team structure, organizational design, and analytics related to all of that. And so we have all of that for 2024 that's been released, that's been published, that's been out for a while. And we're currently in our last endeavor of the last 4 weeks or so of our 2025 survey. And then 𝗕cie_𝗺𝗵𝗂𝗍, the Senior Research Director over at INS, and I fly around and speak at the CISO roundtable events. We also get invited to our session was accepted at RSA. I'm happy to say it was one of the highest rated sessions at RSA, so we're really happy about that. We did the same at 𝗕Sci_SAC, we did the same at 𝗕𝗖𝗇, and we present sometimes to you all, and some of you may remember that Nick and I did this maybe 2 or 3 years ago to go through some of the CISO comp and budget trends. I think as we look at some of the trends in 2025, a couple of things. I think that coming out of COVID, it was really heady times in 21 and 22 where budgets were exploding. The average budget increase for security was upwards of 30%. That's the time that we're talking about when comp really took off. Maybe mention that comp just taking off, and teams were really working very hard and growing and scaling. The economy was going well. Starting in Q4 of 2023, we saw a lot of that being ratcheted downwards. So people expected a certain budget commitment for 2024, got into Q4 of 2023, it got slashed by whatever percentage. You get into Q1 of 2024, hey, can you take a couple percentage points off the top? And that has really continued to where we are today. And so it's been a lot over the last 12 to 18 months, and you probably have mostly seen this yourselves. It's a lot of doing more with less, leaning out teams, trying to leverage AI, but getting more scope and responsibility than resourcing to support that scope and responsibility. And we have seen that pretty much across the board. There are some exceptions, organizations that are doing really well. There are pockets of high growth, high margin, high comp. Insurance is one. Insurance is setting record profits and things like that. And that consequently works with the security team budgets as well that match those macro trends. But I think that there used to be a time where it was security was a bit untouchable because it's, well, we have to build a program. Either regulators are requiring it or customers are requiring it. And now that baseline program for most companies, if not all companies, has pretty much been built, it's what added capabilities do you need at this point? And how do you do that in an environment where there's belt tightening across the board? And I welcome anybody wants to jump in here and has any comments on it.
I would just add to your point, to add on to it, Steve, is as we talked about in 2014, 15, 16, every year, companies would hear for us, hey, what you want is very limited in the market. You need to pay a lot more than you think, and they heard that every year after year from us, of course, we were like, sorry to tell you, but this is happening. And so when interest rate, as we know now, when interest rates started being hiked, to cool off inflation and in spring of 2022, it essentially did pop the bubble, right, to where we are today. So we had several, starting in 22, it didn't come down right away, but 23, by the end of 23, early 24, we were starting to sort of bottom out on the economy at large. And there were definitely, particularly in tech, I think there were a lot of layoffs. So all of a sudden, for the first time in 10, 11, 12 years, there was more inventory on the sidelines of cybersecurity than they remembered, right? So they were like, it's never like this. So all of a sudden, we have some great people who are out there and needing work, and we don't have as many seats to fill. And to Steve's point, budget tightening, do more with less, and there might have been a little bit on top of those macro trends. There might have been a little bit of backlash from companies who were hearing it for 10 years in a row. You're not paying enough. You're not paying enough. You need more. Do more. And I think there was a certain bit of, well, it's finally a buyer's market for them. And they were like, well, we're not going to pay as much. And so there was a little bit of that. But I think, overall, I think everybody is abundantly aware of how cybersecurity risk is one of the biggest risks of any business, right? And so many people have been burned with ransomware and everything else that, everybody's learned their lesson. They're aware. Of course, they're a lot more aware when they get burned by a breach, but we're in an interesting point. I'm a guy, I like to say I get easily distracted. So I'm a look around the corner guy. So I'm like, what's next? What's next? So I'm sort of shocked that I'm here 15 years later still doing cybersecurity recruiting, because I would have thought I'd be doing something different at this point. But it tells me that the industry is still growing. The industry is still incredibly dynamic. The industry is still a top focus for most companies. It's just interesting all around, and it's not a nice to have, it's a must have, and I do think almost every company understands that now. Whether they invest properly in it or not is another thing, but the awareness is there. And we worked with a lot of private equity businesses, and they really are reluctant because they're only holding an asset for 3 to 5 years, right? Their whole business model is, I talked to one private equity firm. They said, I buy 12 companies a year, I sell 12 companies a year. Buy, sell, buy, sell, buy, sell. They don't hold them very long, 3, 4, 5 years, not like venture, which might stay private for 10, 12 years before people get liquid. But they really, because they only hold for a short period of time, they like to get away with not investing properly in cybersecurity until they get hit. So that, then they get a ransomware event, and then all of a sudden they're paying 5, 10 million or more dollars, and they're going, gosh, I really wish I'd spent the $1 million or $2 million in a program that I needed to, even for a smaller asset. So we see that firsthand, and we get those calls. We get those calls of, God, I just paid $12 million, and if I had only invested $1.5 million or $2 million, I wouldn't have been. I'd be in this spot. I know a lot of the audience is pretty technical, which, although most companies, you could say it's a business risk role. So help put cybersecurity into the business context of what does it mean to me, at different investment levels, and help me manage the risk overall of our franchise. That is true, but all things being equal, I think companies would prefer a more technical CISO. So if you can walk and chew gum at the same time, so if you can master the business risk dialogue and engagement with your company, they are looking for more technical leaders. And I think the just unbelievable tsunami of AI has put that under greater focus. So if you're coming from AppSec or ProductSec, I would argue you're a more interesting candidate for many leadership roles, even CISO roles. And now with AI, if I were you, I would grab a hold of that trend and stay as current as you possibly can. I'm very lucky. I have a son in university right now who's a computer science and math major, and he just finished his second year, and he's staying at home working an internship for an AI startup. So he comes in every day. I don't know much about technology and AI, I got to tell you. So, but he comes in every day and he shows me what he's doing with Cursor and all these other tools that he's using, and he's written 10,000 lines of code in 2 weeks to create some new thing. And I'm just blown away. I'm very lucky to have that little insight into AI and what's going on. I would say we're already working on AI security searches, and our partner, Mercedes Chatfield Taylor, she's sort of the queen of VC. So she's one of the biggest names in venture recruiting, and 90% of what she's doing is AI, AI investors, AI technology executives on the go-to-market side. So our firm, we get real great insight into the growth in the AI. And again, one of the things, the big takeaways I would leave you today with is embrace it as much as possible. The downside would be, hey, AI is coming. They're going to ask me to do even more with less. They're going to ask us to reduce headcount. They're and just solve the problem with the magic push the AI button, right? Which we all know is so much more difficult than that. But
I'm curious
on the
too.
upside is you can steal that narrative and run with it. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, sorry, no, that's perfect. That's a perfect lead into my question, which is, feel free to drop in the chat or come off mute. I'm curious if anybody on the line has been engaged in their AI policy discussions internally. Does your company have an AI policy? Are you and your teams engaged in defining that policy? And there's a specific reason I'm asking this question, but I see Nitin, you're nodding your head. Doug, maybe you are too. Feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I can add a little here because we've been actively pursuing AI in multiple ways. We're not only bringing AI into our product that we're rebuilding them and pushing a new strategy for our commercial side, but we're also trying to bring in more efficiencies using some of the native internal AI tools like Copilot and controlled Azure MLMs. So you have to really think about AI from a cybersecurity perspective, not only the building the lines of code, which we're doing that in GitHub and Copilot again there too, but you got to think about how you're also defending the product itself that might be producing AI results in the software as a service that you're providing to your customers. So it's a multi-sided approach that you have to think about from a CISO perspective.
Yeah, for sure. Adam, you had a question?
More like a comment. I lead security here at 𝗖𝗂𝗏, and we have a kind of the trifecta. One, we're an AI company, so we're managing the risk of leveraging AI third-party providers and customers using our platform. The second element there is we're also leveraging AI to make ourselves more efficient. And then I think the final thing is like everybody has this tool that they want to bring in for AI, and we're still a startup, so we can't be a blocker. So we have to allow it in. So the model that I leverage is all about data classification. And the overall strategy for reducing risk there is identifying what data we're going to be dealing with. Is it customer data, sensitive data, or just like confidential data? And then based off of that heuristic, determine what level of third-party risk assessment I need to do, and then on top of that, understand what additional threat models are required to be successful at protecting the business.
Yeah, red team is tremendous, right? Your red team has to start thinking about how those guardrails are being defined when you're trying to do internal efficiencies. So I agree with you.
And on that note, Steve, I had experience working with 3 different kinds of company. One, from IBM standpoint, everything was used as an AI LLM internal model. IBM is one of the leaders in Watson X, Granite model, and training a lot of things. They also had in-house IBM Consulting Advantage, which was like a Granite model LLM, helping consultants to build their own content, presentation, and whatnot. And then we have industries like gaming with Caesars, where they had AI acceptable use policy, where they have limited everything, as in you cannot access ChatGPT, Gemini, or anything of that sort. Only acceptable form is Copilot, and Copilot is also restricted primarily because it is only integrated with your native Windows application or Microsoft applications. And then working with startup in oil and gas manufacturing, where they don't know what they don't know, right? As in everything was open. More importantly, you have to build all of those acceptable use policy right from scratch. People have unlimited access to all forms of data. So building on the identities, building on the content access, and more importantly, role-based access. So my point is, I think at this point of time, even if we are talking about acceptable use of AI, it's widespread, as in there are industries which are heavily encouraging people to use AI and enhance productivity as such, with a caveat that they're only using limited data and not exposing any sensitive data, company sensitive data, or using outside AI platform, to where it is all restricted. Hey, we are not ready for AI. Let's first of all build the foundation, build the framework, and then we'll talk about how we will deal that AI as a platform.
Yeah, I love pointing out that not every company or sector is using this in the same way, because I think the reality is that these decisions on how to leverage it, what to allow, what guardrails to put in place, these conversations are being had. And if the security perspective isn't in the room during those conversations, and you flag something later on, you're going to end up having to relitigate decisions that have already been made by other leaders. So the more that you can get in front of it, the better. Nitin, do you have a comment? I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I have a different track. I think all good points, and I agree with the fellow participants. We are on the same boat. I think, being a technology consulting and services firm, we sell data and AI work, right, for our clients. So we have to actually follow a lot of these things internally. My point is little different. Can we use AI to transform our own function? That is the problem which is now being put in front of me. Which is, I'm actually presenting to our board in 2 days' time, and they're going to ask me this question too. Like, how are you making your function operationally efficient? Can you reduce headcount? Can you get more faster? I think that issue or that challenge is a very interesting one, which we all should talk. I'm not saying we need to talk it now in this forum, but I think we need to ponder on that. So
yeah, we very clearly see in both in our data and when I fly around and have these conversations, most security leaders and CISOs that I talk to say that it's much easier to get budget for tooling than it is for people. And so what does that mean? Because what ends up happening is you're not even leveraging all of the tool. You're only leveraging part of the tool because you don't have enough people to actually administer and manage the outputs. You probably have salespeople knocking on your door saying you're only leveraging 40% of what you already bought. And that's the difficulty in an environment where you're being asked to do more, but the resources are even more stricken than they were before.
Yeah, I joke with people, I guess it's not so funny for all of us in cybersecurity, but cybersecurity versus AI, right? And how it's perceived by like a CEO, right? And I said, it feels like cybersecurity, no matter how much people talk about how important it is and everything else, to a CEO, it's annoying, scary, and expensive, right? I mean, it feels like a tax on the business. And we've been doing this for so long, and yet it still feels that way. Like everybody's like, I wish I didn't have to deal with it, but it's a necessary evil and it costs me too much money and it's really scary. And then AI on the opposite side is like, oh my God, I love it. I get to like fire half the people at my company and increase my margin and grow revenue. Love it. Can't wait. So I think there's some truth in that, but and of course then security crosses over to both, right? As you're pointing out. I did want to see, I saw one thing posted by 𝗕ciecie𝗸𝗺𝗂𝗃 here about that a lot of organizations need help on how to hire a CISO. We would agree, no matter how much we talk to the people at large in companies and executives, it's still sort of shocking how much education Steve and I do 15 years later on a new CISO pitch or search, where we're talking, and then the jury members, who are interviewing the candidates, they don't all have the same understanding or assumption of what's needed. And, all of these things. And anyway, we do our best, to help educate them on what's out there and how much it costs and what's the appropriate level of, investment for their particular opportunity. But it is amazing how much hand-holding is still necessary for companies.
The other thing to consider is, when we do our state of the CISO research, we try to ascertain what are the different ways that organizations view their cybersecurity leaders. And we break that down. I'm gonna share my screen here and talk a little bit about what we mean by this. So we break that down into 3 cohorts or 3 buckets. And this is not to say that an individual is strategic, functional, or tactical. This is to really say, what does strategic, functional, and tactical mean in terms of the organization itself? And being thoughtful about, where do I fit in as a practitioner? Where am I and what do I aspire to be and where do I want to take my career? And does the organization that I'm currently working for align to where I want to be? Because you could be the most strategic CISO in the world. If you are likely in the legal function or business services function, they're not going to really view the function as strategic, risk-based leadership. And consequently, what we see is that the further on the left of this chart, the more strategic the CISO, banking, fintech, tech, typically speaking, the more opportunity to talk with leadership, the higher in the organization in terms of banding, the more reps and time in front of the board. This morning, I was going through some of our preliminary data for 2025, and there's a very clear correlation between CISOs and the time that they have in front of the board. This isn't to say 15 minutes quarterly. This is, I'm getting an hour, I'm getting a half an hour, I'm getting 2 hours, we're doing tabletop exercises. And it's not just, well, you're in front of the board, therefore you're more satisfied and the budget is higher and all of this. It's much more integrated risk. You're viewing this as a team sport. And if the organization is doing the same, that could be really helpful. And so there are things that CISOs can change to make oneself more strategic, to make oneself more business-centric and risk-centric. But you also have to be mindful of, what is the appetite of the organization in terms of how they view the function? Because that may be changeable, but it also may not be. And so I point that out just to be thoughtful about, where do you want to take your career and does it align with where you are in your own organization today? Yeah.
To that point, we've seen a lot of people, especially over the last 10 years, some companies realize they're in trouble and they want to demonstrate that they're serious about security without really processing it and understanding it more comprehensively of like what they really need to run a successful information security program. And sometimes companies, I think, are a little reactive, and then they'll buy a CISO, or they'll spend the money on that, and sometimes the money is really good, and we see people have seen people jump to these opportunities only to regret it, several months into the new job, because they were sold a bag of goods. They talked a good game and everything else, but after they did an assessment and they came to them and said, okay, well, here's what I'm going to need, to bring you up to speed and mature the program. And then the budget's just not there. The commitment's not there. And as we know, with liability and exposure, all of a sudden that leader is in a real pickle, right? And it's not a fun place to be, no matter how much money you're getting paid, because it's just not worth it. The reality is, fortunately, if you're a good cybersecurity executive, there's plenty of money, whether you're tippy-topping your value in the market right this very moment or not. There's plenty out there. There's plenty of need. If you do a good job, have great references, come recommended to the company, I think at that point it becomes, is this the right move for me? Is this the right company? Do I feel supported? Do I like leadership? who am I reporting to? You know, what does that look like? Comp can accelerate very quickly, like over a 10-year period. Like, you know, the reality is some people stay at one company for a long, long time, and that's great. And we know lots of people like that who have stayed at one company for the last 10 years or 12 years or more, and been at a big enough company where they had lots of different challenges for them to grow in their career in information security. But the reality is, in the last 11 years, 12 years in particular, it's required a lot of movement, you know, to advance your career. You go in, do a good job, stay for 3 or 4 years. If you're good and you have a good reputation, the demand generally has been so strong that they're going to find you, right, one way or another. And then you're going to get paid. Like we've watched people get paid X, and then 3 years later they're getting paid X plus 50% or 2X. And then they stay for another 3 years and they get paid another 2X. So there's great, you know, compensation available for great leaders, you know, and it's getting broader and broader. I mean, you're into thousands of companies who can afford proper cybersecurity leadership. So I do think, like we talked about earlier, that there's been a little bit of with the tech wreck and an inflation and interest rate problem. You know, there were a lot of people who spilled into the market in the last couple of years. That is going to, if we ever get past tariffs and everything else, like that, the market will pick up very quickly, I think, from here. So, you know, you take private equity, for example. They haven't had their business model, and the M&A cycle and IPOs have not been good for years, right? So when you see that start to pick up, you're going to see tons of activity and companies, and they're going to mop up that excess inventory of credible candidates that's out there in the market. And before long, it's going to get back to a seller's market. So if I were to forecast that, I would tell you by 2027, it's going to be a seller's market again. And if you're a top executive and you have the goods and they really want it, you're going to get fair value right now. That there's always a bid for that, always. In a down market economically or an up market, there's a bid for that. But if I were to say broadly speaking, overall in the market, I think the end of this year, 2026, is going to start to ramp up. And by 2027, I think you're going to hear a different narrative about companies bitching and moaning about how much they have to pay top talent in cybersecurity and how unavailable great people are. I think that's what's going to happen.
Yeah. I'm gonna jump on Doug and Tony, and then I'll swing to you, Adam. So this is why we see CISOs jumping after 12 months. I think that depends on the situation. People who go into private equity situations where it's, hey, we have aspirations to transact in the next 12 to 18 months. And then in 12 months, it's like, well, 12 to 18 months. And then 24 months later, it's 12 to 18 months. And people can get tired of that narrative and they want to diversify and do something a little bit different. Tony, for people currently on the sidelines, look, I think it's just time, right? I think it's time, it's reps. It only takes one, right? And there's a lot of good talent out there on the sidelines, probably more than there was really ever at the level of sophistication now. Adam, yeah, feel free to jump in here.
Yeah, so one thing that I think is a little bit absent from this conversation about CISOs is not all organizational CISOs are created or cut the same way. And I think when we start talking about CISOs in a broad manner, it really covers over the fact that like somebody who's a really good like head of security or CISO at a startup is not going to make it at a bigger organization. And then the other part of that is like leadership styles and culture. I think it's already been touched on a little bit, but like when we start drilling down deeper into the different organizational leaders, you start to see different leadership styles that are very sophisticated and cut for specific types of organizations. And I just want to call that out because a lot of times when, you know, I have these conversations with people like about leadership positions, they're looking for somebody who's going to come in who can lead an org of 50 people, versus, somebody who can lead an organization across the board and then also lead the security function from a technical perspective.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a good point.
Yeah.
We see a lot, like, we do a lot of venture stuff too. So, we get new startups who are like, hey, we need we have 2 security engineers, right? And we need someone a little bit, bigger. We don't want a CISO per se, but we need someone to run probably not 2, but eventually maybe 5 to 7 person team, and to be able to talk to our customers, right? So there's different, to your point, versions of security leadership. The other thing that we're seeing that not everybody wants to do, we're seeing a very strong pickup with startups, particularly in the security space, of this field CISO. Some people call it CISO in residence. And I think those have not been attractive historically, but they're growing in popularity. Sorry, I got a barky dog in the back, but they're growing in popularity, and startups are starting to really pay for that. And to give you an example of what that looks like, they may pay someone up to $300,000 or even $400,000 cash, and then several, $1 million or $2 million of equity for these roles. For those who are willing to be in that sort of technical sales role with a startup, not a lot of people want to do that. Operating CISOs, I think, is a very small percentage of people, but we're seeing that explode, and we're seeing some opportunities with really hot security startups that are pretty amazing. We just did one with 𝗕𝗂𝗿𝗶𝘁𝗍𝘂, and Bobby Ford, who came out of HPE recently, took that job. We're doing some work like that with Sierra right now. But everybody wants to be the next whiz, right? But you can jump on, like, for those who are like, hey, I don't want to be an operating security executive right now. I may want to flex or try this and, frankly, play a little digital Powerball, with the equity. I also think, so some people may want to do that. And then I would just say, pick wisely, because there's a lot of security vendors that are going to go belly up and it's not going to work. So you got to make sure you're on the right rocket ship. But that also doesn't mean you can't go back into an operating CISO role, right? So if you went and did a startup like that in that capacity for 2 or 3 years, you could also pivot back and still jump on and do an enterprise CISO role. And, it doesn't mean you're out, of jumping back into an operating role.
Yeah, I want to double click on something that Adam said earlier, which is that, not all CISO titles or positions are equal, right? And I think that this is the challenge that we all have, because if you meet a CFO or a general counsel, you likely know what the reporting structure looks like. You likely know what the scope of responsibility looks like. You likely know the leveling in the organization as well. And when you think about CISO, Matt mentioned some of these venture work that we've done. We've had clients that have said, oh, we need a mature CISO for our 2-person engineering team. And Matt and I will kind of sidebar and say they really need a director of security engineering. But when you ask them that, they say, no, it's CISO, it's CISO. Well, you can call it what you want, but what is the scope of responsibility? Because when you send in a seasoned CISO who's prepared board materials and is at that more strategic level, they'll say this person's too high level and they need them more hands-on. And it's really director level, head of security engineering with a CISO title only because that individual happens to be the most senior person in the function. It's also that in those organizations, those individuals have fewer lines of reporting and fewer levels between them and the CEO, only because the company hasn't matured yet to put in the levels in between in terms of maturity and just in terms of org design.
Yeah. I would say,
go ahead,
other roles, I see, what about BISO role? What about some of these other things? There's so much opportunity. There is so much opportunity. And with each passing quarter, you're seeing companies who are taking their security programs to the next level, you know, particularly large enterprises, all of a sudden these BISO roles are opening up as they mature their program. You know, and then there are people who run the BISOs, you know, who aren't CISO. You know, the amount of senior security roles that aren't CISO that we see are tremendous. I mean, we, you know, to be honest with you, we hired a global head of security engineering for $1.1 million. I mean, like like if you have the skills and the capabilities, there's so many senior level executive roles. You don't need to be CISO to be properly, to get fair market value for what you're doing. And, you know, we see this with the obvious ones like a Google or a Microsoft or a JP Morgan Chase. You know, you know, some of those, I knew someone at JP Morgan Chase who was a BISO getting paid $3 million a year. Okay. So now that's JP Morgan Chase. It's an anomaly, and, you know, all of these things. But it just demonstrates that as we go on, as security continues to build out, if you look at this in the context of we're really an 11-year-old industry since 2014, when companies finally started to take it seriously, we're still in the build out. We're still in the build out. And AI will affect this, but you know, there's so much opportunity. There's going to be so much opportunity for many, many years.
Yeah. A topic that's come up in the chat that is really important. So personal and professional liability and managing personal and professional risk in this function is a very real conversation that needs to be had. Last week, I hosted an event in San Francisco with Munich Re Ventures, and I hosted a panel with Jason Clinton, the CISO at Anthropic, Brad Arkin, who's the CISO and head of customer trust at Salesforce, an attorney who works through these policies, and a policy underwriter from Munich Re. We're going to have a blog that comes out. It'll be on the Artico website in a matter of a day or two. So I'll be posting on that when it's out. I definitely encourage everybody to take a look at that. It's not a topic that we can get too into here, just because of the time constraints, but definitely ask questions of your mentors, take a look at our blog, follow up with us if you have further questions, but it's something that's really important to protect your personal reputation and personal assets as well.
Yeah. We're actually hosting a next generation cyber leadership event next week in Mystic, Connecticut, and working with some Fortune 500 companies. And we also have some great, to Steve's point, mentors. We have the CISO from Uber, Marriott, RTX, Google, others coming in to speak, Vista Private Equity, and so forth. But what we're seeing more and more, there's also a lot of people semi-retiring. A lot of these CISOs are coming off market right now, but they're not retiring. They're going to be venture capitalists. They're working with private equity. They're working with some startups, you know, and so forth. But there's an amazing amount of new mentors that are going to have a lot more time to spend with you, you know. And like Charles Blauner was an obvious one coming out of Citi several years ago, and then he ran a mentorship program, a Jim Routh, now a Phil Venables, you know, others. And we're talking to them because sometimes they talk to us about their career development and they're like, I think I'm done. I have enough money to retire, you know, but I'm 55 and I don't want to retire yet. So I want to stay. Andy Ellis, great example. You know, I want to give back. I want to be involved. I want to stay relevant. So there's more and more and more people available for you for coaching, mentorship, you know, and we're happy to connect you with some people.
To go back, we talked about, I think Adam mentioned this CISO at the smaller firm versus the bigger firm. The most valuable skill set is diversification of experience. And what I mean by that is I think that there are people who think, well, I was a CISO at a $500 million company or a $200 million company, and now I need to be a CISO at a $750 million company to show that scale. But as Matt mentioned, you can make a lot of money and also mitigate some of that liability by going and leading a pillar. And so I think that there are opportunities to think more creatively about your career of, what do I need to tick the box on? Have I been in companies that have been all product companies? Do I want to do something a little bit different there? Have I been in companies that are all large scale? Do I want to do something smaller scale with larger scope? Have I been doing the larger scoped roles, but lack that scale? And I think ticking those boxes as you go through your career will make you more marketable for whatever the next thing is and the next thing after that.
Yeah, that's key. Like, you shouldn't feel stagnant. You should never feel stagnant, right? If you do take something on, maybe that means it's time to move or test the market. There's so much to be building on and adding on that are going to broaden you as an executive. Just make sure, you need to be patient. Not these companies and enterprises and the market don't move on a dime like that, but just make sure you're feeling challenged and you're learning and you're building on your base, of knowledge and experience. Because, and obviously with AI and things like that, there's so much more to tackle and to reposition yourself and your personal brand, right? That's the other thing we talk about. Like, I have a day job. I don't have time to go to dinners or conferences or events or show up at different things. Obviously, you're doing something like that. That's great. Like this is great. But try to find the balance. I think we and companies like people who do their job, like get stuff done and have their heads down. So if you're posting every 2 seconds on LinkedIn about some wonderful cocktail party you just attended with some startup vendors trying to sell you something, after a while that makes you less credible and less desirable. But startups and innovation are a core part of what you do and the problem that you're looking to solve. So find the balance. Don't just be 100% heads down and never look up. As good a executive as you might be at doing security, I think you got to find a little bit of time to engage externally a bit, and then make sure you're working on your personal brand. Like, what narrative do you want to tell, right? And again, that's important too when you're interviewing, because as someone earlier in the chat pointed out, companies are not very good at interviewing in general. Otherwise, Steve and I wouldn't have a job, right? It's like companies are not great at this. And they often in security don't even know what questions to ask you. So if you ever find yourself in it, take the football back. Like, tell your story. Make sure when you go into interviews, you are making sure you're getting your story, all of your career highlights across to them, especially if they don't know how to interview you and they're looking to fill air, and they're you can almost grab the narrative back from them and say, well, that's an interesting point. When I came in today, I thought about your business a lot and how it pertains to my experience. And, I plugged these gaps and I've addressed, my guess is you have these challenges and I really answer a lot of them in this way, right? You can take over the interview. And a lot of times they're happy for you to do so. And then they walk away and they're like, wow, that they totally knew what they were doing. They totally get it, and they get us.
The best interview, right? Feedback that we get, Matt, is like, what? They helped me solve a problem. The candidate helped me solve a problem in the interview. And the only way to do that is to do your due diligence on the company and understand the macro piece, how it applies to your company or the company with whom you're interviewing, and then bringing that down to security. And I think when we talk about, I think the topic of the session was something like moving from application security to CISO or tech leader or whatever, however we want to call that. We're at the point now, everybody on the call here has tech credentials. Nobody's questioning your tech credentials, right? Those are bona fides, and that's entry level kind of table stakes to get to this point in your career. Now it's about business risk. And so having a pulse on the macro, understanding what that means for your business, listening and being engaged in quarterly business reviews, understanding what analysts are saying about your business or a company with whom you're interviewing, really understanding how your company makes money and what makes them tick, because there are security implications to all of that. if you think about the risks that an organization identifies, security is always typically in the top 5, but it's not usually 1 or 2. So it's a component of what they're doing. But if you think about that in the context of the business objectives, are new markets trying to be opened up? Are new products trying to be developed? Is there an M&A strategy? What does that growth plan look like? Or is this an environment of just belt tightening and preservation? Because that all has security implications. And that's the way that you advocate for budget. And that's the way you advocate for your program and yourself, by saying, well, look, in this quarterly business review, I've heard us talk about going out and being really acquisitive. Well, you're not going to be able to do that unless there's a security component to the due diligence around that, right? So,
Yeah.
so you're thinking holistically.
Yeah. And then for some reason, it brought up another topic I think may be relevant. Not everybody wants to move companies, right? And a lot of people are like, I'm loyal. I want to be loyal. I want to stay here. I just want fair market value within reason. If your HR or your team, if they just won't listen to reason on fair, like what is reasonable for loyal cybersecurity executives, to keep them maybe not at the tippy top of fair market value because there's some discount for staying at the company and dealing with the company. We often share our data, survey data with HR teams, and or make ourselves available to talk to HR teams. If this is like a really sensitive topic and it's uncomfortable, we often say, hey, we'll talk to your HR without a search. It doesn't matter. And just say, look, this is what we're seeing. Here's the data. We do this for a living. This is what we see every day, and what companies are paying for a head of security engineering, a head of product security, a head of application security, of your size and scale, blah, blah, blah. We're happy to do that, and we've done that quite a bit, and we've seen security executives stay like 3, 4, 5 years longer than they otherwise would have, because the HR team actually listened and made an adjustment and took care of them.
Yeah, great point. I know we only have a few minutes left. Any closing comments by anybody in the audience that they want to share? Anything else that we haven't talked about? Well, this has been a great discussion.
With you guys.
Yeah, maybe go ahead.
No, I was asking just how do we connect with you guys?
Yeah, connect with us on LinkedIn. I think Raj will probably share our contact details as well. Definitely follow me and Matt on LinkedIn, because a lot of this, including we have our preliminary analytics coming out in about 4 weeks or so. So we post about just every topic imaginable. Our blog post will be coming out on liability later this week. So stay connected there. And yeah, thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Raj. Thank you, Matt.
Glad to be
Steve.
here.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Yeah, Matt, Steve,
Thank
thank you
you.
so much for joining us. This is super helpful. As you can see, the community was very engaged. We can probably have 1 more hour of this session, maybe in a few months from now, and there'll still be a lot of questions. So I do not know if Matt, Steve, will you be at Black Hat by any chance? If you are coming, the reason I asked is we have a PPC Connect event there, and if any of the members here are going to be at Black Hat, that's an opportunity for them to meet you in person, right? So that's why I asked. We'll be in touch. So appreciate your participation here today very much, and there's some interest in members here to be in touch with you, right? I'll figure out what's the best way to do that.